number of persons who are here with the minister, and then I'll give a quick background which will give us a framework for our conversation, both the presentation and the questions, and we'll do all to fit within that one. The Honorable Mohammed Amin Anta is the Minister of State here at the Ministry of Finance. The Honorable John Kumar is Deputy Minister here at the Ministry of Finance. Ms. Eva Mens is the Chief Director here at the Ministry of Finance. Mr. Thomas Apeji is the Acting Director of Budget. Mr. Nasakori, Chef de Cabinet at the Minister's Office. Dr. Alassane Idrisu is the Director of Economic Strategy and Research Division here at the Ministry of Finance. Ms. Grace Moko Ewu is the Director Legal. I would introduce a number of other persons to you shortly. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that the Honorable Minister has been providing updates on the economy for some time now. Almost every other month, he provides an update on the Ghanaian economy. But some of the significant updates that he has provided, or the key ones that you may recall, in Q1 of 2022, after the Q1 cabinet retreat, he announced a number of measures that cabinet had signed off on, aimed at helping us shore up against what at the time we described as the impending economic tide. Then in Q2, or just at the end of Q2, indeed, on the 1st of July, government announced that some engagements were going to start with the International Monetary Fund to ask for some support which will be used to implement Ghana's post-COVID program for economic growth. Now that's very important because sometimes in the narrative and the conversations, the situation of where this fund support comes in gets lost. So it's important we recall 1st of July 2022 when government announced that we were looking for fund support for our post-COVID program for economic growth. Between Q2 and Q4, the engagement went on. In Q4, the Honorable Minister right here provided another update. I remember the fund team was here where the SLA was announced in Q4. Then Q1, Q2 this year, a lot of work has been going on trying to complete debt exchange and get board approval, etc. It is on the back of that the Honorable Minister is providing an update today. It's important that we recall this sequence of events. A number of key things he'll be speaking to include the fact that you may have heard about structural reforms that are part of this fund program. He has a message on that one. I think it's something we need to take note of. He has a message on the structural reforms. Number two, this fund program was designed to help us get back on the path of growth and prosperity. So he has a second message on growth and prosperity and what we'll have to do about it. And then number three, if you read the fund document itself, it talks about vulnerabilities, one of them being in the energy sector. So Honorable Minister has a message on that one as well. So in today's presentation, while he gives a general update, I'd like to encourage you to look out for those three key things: structural reforms, growth and prosperity, vulnerability. So Honorable Minister, we're in your hands.
To you, it's an important day, and let's give thanks to the Lord, for He is good and His love endures forever. So afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the media, as well as everyone joining us on the various social media platforms, I thank you sincerely for honoring our invitation to this press conference. Let me say Happy Father's Day to all men and fathers for the guidance, hard work, and selflessness. May the unfailing grace of God empower us to fulfill our roles to our families and the nation. I just returned from the preliminary sessions of the Afri-Exim Bank Annual General Meeting taking place at the Conference Center in Accra. This is just a year after we hosted the African Development Bank's Annual General Meeting. Truly, the enthusiasm there just indicates that Ghana continues to enjoy global attention as an example of our economic renaissance and considerable goodwill from our African brothers and sisters. There have been significant developments since I went to Parliament in November 2022, engaged in December 2022, and then the approval of the IMF facility May 17th. Subsequent to these and the conclusion of the IMF mission last week, I'll today share with you an update on the economy. More importantly, I also discuss the details of the program of work to return our economy to the path of strong sustainability and growth and provide more opportunities for our people. Ladies and gentlemen, Wednesday, 17th May 2023 is indeed a day to be memorialized. On that day, Ghana secured approval for a $3 billion three-year standard credit facility from the board of the International Monetary Fund to support the implementation of Ghana's post-COVID-19 program for economic growth, PCPEG. As was the case in many other emerging market economies devastated by rising debt, worsening financing conditions, high inflation, deteriorating exchange rate and balance of payment pressures, Ghana sought IMF assistance to support our PCPEG. The implementation of the PCPEG aims to restore macroeconomic stability and debt sustainability and to support inclusive growth while protecting the vulnerable. It is also aimed at building resilience and promote efficiency and competitiveness through wide-ranging and strong structural reforms in key sectors of the economy. We also sought to leverage the catalytic effect an IMF program would offer in terms of accessing additional financing and building confidence. Our decision to seek support was in the context that our envisioned path to rapid economic recovery with a remarkable economic growth rate of 5.1% in 2021 against 0.5% in 2020 had suddenly been halted, requiring us to seek support to enable our people to safely cross the Jordan to our promised land. Ladies and gentlemen, between the announcement, engagements, agreements, approval and disbursement of the first tranche of $604 million on Friday, 19th May 2023, under the ECF was a 10-month period, 1st July 2022 to 19th May 2023, a record time by all standards. Many were surprised when I announced that we were on the cusp of a breakthrough agreement while presenting the 2023 budget statement on Thursday, 17th November 2022. I believed then that we were making remarkable progress towards securing an SLA. The pace of our progress had been underpinned by the unity of purpose by the executive and the ministry, shared focus, diligence, strong collaboration, and of course, the abiding and abundant grace of God. The progress is anchored on the pursuit of planned but sacrificial interventions, including the domestic debt exchange program, to enable us effectively manage the rising cost of debt and create fiscal space for growth-enhancing reforms. As a nation, we need to be proud of what May 17 signals and what we have been able to achieve against all odds and in a turbulent global environment. Our $3 billion support is 3 times our quota and the largest allocation from the Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust, PRGT. We front-loaded within 6 months $1.2 billion of the $3 billion facility, of which $604 million was disbursed within 3 days of approval. Let us also not forget the uncertainties of the G20 Common Framework for Debt Treatment and the role of the Paris Club and China's agreement to co-chair the Official Creditor Committee, and no support from India, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey to deliver financing assurances to the IMF board on May 12th. For us in Ghana, we successfully navigated a difficult domestic debt exchange program with steadfastness, My gratitude to the individuals in banking, insurance, and capital market sectors for their resolve and the strong intercessory prayers by our faith-based organizations. So, fellow Ghanaians, as in Psalm 118, let us indeed give thanks to the Lord for he is good, for this is the Lord's doing, and it is for us marvelous in our eyes. Also, on behalf of His Excellency President Akufo-Addo and the entire government, I would like to express profound appreciation once again to our fellow Ghanaians, especially those who voluntarily and overwhelmingly participated in the debt exchange program, allowing us to achieve an 85% success rate by 14 February 2023 and sacrificing for economic recovery and reform of the Republic. The Right Honorable Speaker and Honorable Members of Parliament for their support, especially in approving key revenue measures on 31st March 2023 to enable us fulfill a key prior action relating to our program with the IMF. Our development partners, especially our bilateral partners, for their financing assurances delivered on Friday, 12 May 2023, which was pivotal in securing IMF board approval. You, our friends in the media, who have kept our people well informed of the process and sustained their hopes despite the misinformation from certain quarters of your fraternity. We are resilient people as Ghanaians, a people of destiny, and we shall prevail in all things because the Lord is on our side and the battle is the Lord's. I also like to express profound gratitude to the IMF Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva, for her unwavering support and belief in our ambitious reform agenda. To Abebe Selassie and especially the IMF Mission Chief, Stephanie Roder, and the team for their tireless efforts and constructive dialogue with government. My sincere thanks also go to the gallant men and women of the technical teams at the Ministry of Finance and Bank of Ghana who worked so hard throughout the period. And thanks to your support, partnership, and forbearance in these key processes, coupled with the implementation of the front-loaded fiscal adjustment outlined in the 2023 budget, as well as other government interventions, we are already seeing positive outcomes. The United States, through the International Development Finance Corporation, within 3 days of the fund approval, announced a program to invest $300 million to establish the Ghana Data Center under the G7 Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. This is very significant as it illustrates the confidence that is being restored and the focus on the private sector growth agenda that we'll be pursuing to transition our economy. On the domestic front, as we speak, inflation has decelerated to 42.2% for the month of May 2023, down from 54.1% at the end of December 2022. The May inflation represents a 1% increase over the April 23 inflation of 41.2%. The May inflation was largely driven by food inflation of 51.8%, up from 48.7% in April, with non-food inflation decelerating to 34.6% from 35.4% in April. The relative rise in inflation in May 2023 appears to reflect the pass-through effect of the utility price adjustment in April and the implementation of the new tax handles in May. We expect inflation to decelerate going forward. The cedi's depreciation has largely stabilized with a year-to-date depreciation rate of about 21.9% as of February 16, 2023, down from 50% in December 2023. The 91-day T-bill rate has declined to 20.6%, down from 35.5% at the end of 2022. Gross international reserves has improved after the disbursement of the first tranche of $604 million US dollars following the approval of the IMF program. The current account balance turned positive at 0.9% of GDP at the end of March 2023 from minus 2.2% at the end of December 2022. In addition, The trade balance improved from 0.9% of GDP at the end of January 2023 to 2.2% at the end of April 2023. And recent GDP statistics released by the Ghana Statistical Service in April 2022 showed that real growth ended 2022 at 3.1%, which was higher than growth projections by most international organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an ambitious agenda for reform. Let me state clearly that securing the IMF program is not an end to our current challenges, though it has significantly paved the way for the implementation of an ambitious and well thought out program of reform for our economy and country. In fact, the real work of adjustment, realignment, and the return to a path of steady economic growth has just begun. Let us brace ourselves for the needed reforms, especially in expenditure control, non-arrears accumulation, revenue growth, ECG collections, and energy sector reforms in order to rebuild the walls of the Republic with urgency. That said, our reform program, the post-COVID-19 program for economic growth, now supported by a 3-year standard credit facility arrangement of the IMF, is built on clear targets and strong policy and structural measures. Over the medium term, the PCPEG-backed IMF program seeks to promote a credible fiscal consolidation program anchored by strong domestic revenue mobilization and high spending efficiency. The government is targeting a primary surplus on a commitment basis, the critical fiscal anchor under the program of 1.5% of GDP by 2025 through to 2028, to firmly anchor inflation expectations and preserve financial stability, to restore public debt to sustainable levels by 2028 while observing the two binding constraints of A, public debt in present value terms to GDP ratio of 55% or less, and an external debt service to revenue ratio of 18% or less. To enhance economic competitiveness with exports surpassing 37% of GDP in the medium term. Safeguarding social protection and enhancing targeting to ensure effectiveness of key interventions, minimizing fiscal risks, including from SOEs, and deepening structural reforms in targeted sectors such as energy and cocoa. It is important to stress that this structural reform agenda is consistent with government's own public financial management strategy to transition from central government to general government operations. This shift is critical as it facilitates clear oversight over key state institutions, that's MMDAs, SOEs, especially Cocoa Board and ECG, and others in the energy sector, and other quasi-state institutions whose operations have significant and direct fiscal impact on our economy. To put it in perspective, about 25% of our assessed debt burden emanates from non-central government operations, mainly from SOEs. Our ability to institute better governance standards of these institutions to address their liabilities and promote their growth will be significantly improved, especially in this period of collective reform. Critically, we must all remain committed to the agreed wide-ranging and strong structural reforms designed to address structural weaknesses and build resilience in key areas, including tax policy and tax administration, expenditure control and arrears clearance, financial stability, financial sector plans, review of statutory funds, governance and corruption, debt management, fiscal credibility, and energy sector and cocoa sector SOE reforms. With legacy debt in the energy sector reaching about $2 billion as at the end of May 2023, and an estimated shortfall of $5.9 billion between 2023 and 2025 due to the current conditions of SOEs and IPPs in the value chain in the sector. The sector has been prioritized for comprehensive reforms. It is expected that structural reforms in the sector should reduce the shortfall by at least $2.95 billion over the period. These reforms, which are aimed at sustainably reducing losses in the energy sector, will be outlined in the updated Energy Sector Recovery Plan, ESRP, which will be approved by Cabinet by end June 2023. It will be accompanied by, amongst others, the operationalization of a framework to guide the granting of energy sector subsidies by end June 2023, implementation of an inter-utility debt settlement framework on a quarterly basis starting from June 2023, and implementation of a mechanism to enforce the guidelines of the cash waterfall mechanism and natural gas clearinghouse by end June 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, similar reforms are envisaged under the PCPEC to revamp the cocoa sector and reduce and eliminate the annual losses of Cocoa Board and its indebtedness. The reforms in the cocoa sector include the implementation of a turnaround strategy to be approved by Cabinet by end June 2023. This is expected to address cocoa pricing issues, Cocoa Board oversight challenges, introduce cost rationalization measures, and a phase-out of quasi-fiscal spending. Ladies and gentlemen, other structural reforms to entrench fiscal discipline and bolster transparency include reforms to enhance revenue administration and tax policy, operationalization of the Human Resource Management Information System, enhancing spending controls and prevention of arrears buildup, and streamlining of earmark funds. In addition, government is transitioning from central government reporting to general government and from cash to accrual reporting. Our commitment to these reforms is matched by our relentless pursuit of innovation and strengthened partnership. Backed by the renewed drive for reforms, government is working towards securing significant support from our multilateral partners. Altogether, and including the IMF funds, World Bank, and AFDB support, we expect multilateral support of about $2 billion for 2023 and $6.2 billion between 2023 and 2026. We expect the World Bank to provide a total support of $1.6 billion, while the AFDB provides a total support of $200 million over the program period. In addition, we expect to mobilize catalytic funding, some $30 million this year and $330 million between 2023 and 2026 from bilateral creditors. We are also collaborating with other development partners, including the World Bank and the Africa Development Bank, to finance the Ghana Financial Stability Fund to provide liquidity and solvency support for the financial sector as a result of the assessed impact of the DDEP. The first phase of the fund involves a $750 million package to address solvency challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, be assured that while aggressively mobilizing domestic revenue, we remain focused on mobilizing complementary, sustainable external resources for our recovery and reform efforts to build a resilience that will promote shared prosperity for our people, while protecting and improving the lives of our more vulnerable population. A special collaborative effort between the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Trade, Ministry of Agriculture, and GIPC will be part of the program on the thematic working groups on growth to attract significant private capital. Ladies and gentlemen, government intends to invest these resources to advance macroeconomic stability and shared economic growth. Government is very intentional in ensuring that growth and job creation are not sacrificed in the process of restoring macroeconomic stability and debt sustainability. Specific interventions to support the economic recovery process include: 1, improving the business environment, reducing the cost of doing business, and enhancing export competitiveness. In addition, local content legislation will be reviewed to encourage FDI while leveraging the opportunities offered by the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. 2, promoting entrepreneurship through initiatives such as the Youth Start program to create more jobs for the banking sector and faith-based organizations, fast-tracking the implementation of key growth-oriented programs under the Ghana Care Sobatampa program, These programs include the economic enclave projects to enable self-sufficiency in rice, maize, vegetables, and poultry, and supporting large-scale agriculture and agribusiness interventions through the Development Bank of Ghana. Transitioning to a digital economy to boost productivity, tax collection, and formality. Expanding digital government services and promoting the BOG's digital currency will support digitalization and financial inclusion with adequate safeguards in place, and strengthening policies to support climate change adaptation and mitigation for inclusive growth. As you know, I was in South Africa, in South Korea and South Africa immediately after our IMF approval to drum up private sector engagements in agriculture and technology in particular, in order to pursue a more deliberate and aggressive growth agenda. We'll continue to engage the global community to support our growth program for growth and economic turnaround. We will be launching a Ghana Mutual Prosperity Dialogue agenda to encourage domestic and external investors to be at the core of our growth agenda. We'll be working with Ghanaian businesses and entrepreneurs, think tanks and NGOs, and larger resident multinationals such as the telcos, mining and oil companies to facilitate ease of doing business and promoting business in Ghana. In line with our tradition of compassion and care for the underprivileged, we expect to strengthen social protection through increases in social spending to protect the most vulnerable and the poor from the impact of adjustments under the program. Recall that the 2023 budget already made specific provision for one, doubling the leave payment per beneficiary household from 45 cedis per month to 90 cedis, with progressive increases in the number of beneficiary households from the current 344,185 households. Coverage will be expanded to all 2.5 million extremely poor individuals by 2024. We plan that by end September 2023, an indexation mechanism will be introduced in the LEAP program to prevent erosion of value over time. Increasing the budgetary allocation for the school feeding program to compensate for higher costs of meals and also to ensure more efficient management of the program. Increasing the capitation grant over time as part of measures to improve foundational learning. And ensuring prompt payment of the NHIS from the Consolidated Fund. There will also be a review of the package of benefits and tariff structures for the scheme. Ladies and gentlemen, it must be clear that there is enormous work ahead. To sustain and optimize this partnership with the IMF, Ghana proposed and negotiated 6 quantitative performance criteria, 9 structural benchmarks, and 3 indicative targets. Specifically, these performance indicators have been carefully selected to enable us to achieve our reform objectives as well as build resilience to better withstand future global and domestic shocks as they are certain to occur. We would like to emphasize that contrary to other commentaries, these performance indicators emanate from our cabinet-approved PC-PEG. To support the effective implementation of reforms and interventions of the IMF-backed PC-PEG, government has put in place a clear implementation strategy. The strategy includes sensitization of key stakeholders, including Cabinet, EMT, Council of State, Parliament, National House of Chiefs, Organized Labor, Employers Associations, including AGI and Chambers of Commerce, MDAs, MMDAs, investors, CSOs and think tanks, FBOs, the general public, NDPC, commissioners, heads of SOEs, development partners, and the media. We have already engaged Cabinet, EMT, sovereign sector regional ministers and MCs organized by the Ministry of Agriculture, Council of State, chief directors and heads of covered entities, PPME directors in MDAs, MOF staff, and a cross-section of the media. Today, the general public has accordingly been apprised. The rest will follow. Implementing a comprehensive communication strategy for the PC-PEG program, ensuring public funds and their usage, including the IMF funds, are audited by the Auditor General of Ghana. Program implementation will be monitored on a monthly basis at various levels, including Cabinet, Economic Management Team, and the Economic Policy Coordinating Committee. Additionally, we are introducing 6 thematic working groups which will meet weekly and will be chaired by the Minister of State and Deputy Ministers of the Ministry of Finance, Deputy Ministers of other relevant ministries, and Deputy Governors of the Bank of Ghana. In fact, specifically, the following thematic working groups have been established. 1. Energy sector SOEs/Cocoa Board structural reforms. 2. Public financial management structural reforms. 3. Financial sector structural reforms. 4. Tax policy and revenue administration structural reforms. 5. Macro fiscal policy reforms. And 6. Growth and social protection. Ladies and gentlemen, as this path towards a reformed, diversified, and resilient economy, we stand ready to engage and receive inputs from all stakeholders to implement the IMF-backed PC-PEC program. Accordingly, civil society, think tanks, organized labor, FBOs, and private sector actors will be engaged in our policy dialogues towards effective implementation of the program. Already discussions are ongoing with ASSET. Despite the considerable program progress, there remains key outstanding operations, especially in debt restructuring. We are at advanced stages of completing the debt exchange program in relation to the cocoa bills and the US dollar-denominated local bonds. We have also rolled out a program to engage independent power producers. Consistent with the MOU signed with organized labor in December 2022 on the exemption of pension funds, they continue to be exempted. Government is currently engaging organized labor and pension fund corporate trustees in line with the MOU to explore mutually beneficial options within debt sustainability limits and to promote macroeconomic stability and economic growth in the spirit of social partnership. We have also successfully worked with the Paris Club and other creditors to determine the parameters of our official debt restructuring under the G20 Common Framework for Debt Treatment. In the coming weeks, we will seek to complete the MOU of the OCC on the terms of bilateral debt treatment. Government will sustain engagement with private creditors, Eurobond investors on external debt to reach agreement with the private creditors in the shortest possible time. In light of the above, we will count on all stakeholders, especially the media, to be circumspect on their reportage on the economy to avoid derailing the progress being made. Our love of country must supersede all, and as the late P.A.V. Ansah, University of Ghana Communications School professor said, Journalism 101 teaches media students that they have 3 basic roles: to inform, educate, and entertain. However, for developing countries, there's a 4th, to foster national cohesion. National cohesion is the foundation upon which any and everything else is built, unquote. Ansah had journalists in mind when attaching his addendum to the classical test. But as we watch events unfold in Mali, Burkina Faso, and other countries elsewhere in the region, this is in fact a rule that holds true for everyone. The misreporting on China was unnecessary and unfortunate. Unfounded accusations against government officials leading to the recovery are untenable and serve no useful purpose. Undoubtedly, the need for accuracy must override speed in these circumstances. Ladies and gentlemen, we are certainly at the beginning of a promising journey towards not just recovery, but also resettling our economy. As a number of you have said to me, we have turned the corner. Government is committed to restoring Ghana's economic fortunes within the shortest possible time through a combination of front-loaded fiscal adjustment and structural reforms while creating the conditions for private sector-led growth. Going forward, we will continue to count on the support of all Ghanaians, including the general public, to achieve the objectives set out in the IMF-backed PC-PEC. We engaged the IMF Technical Mission last week, 8th to 15th June, to discuss recent economic developments and the implementation of the program. In this regard, we undertook a joint assessment of Ghana's preparedness for the first review of the program scheduled for September 2023. This will pave the way for the IMF board to consider and approve the first review and the disbursement of the second tranche of $600 million in November 2023. As the IMF attested to all of us in their press release on 15 June 2023, against a complex global, I quote, against a complex global economic backdrop, the Ghanaian economy is showing signs of stabilization with softening inflation and increased international reserve and less volatile exchange rate. The economy is showing signs of stabilization, softening inflation, and an increase in international reserve and a less volatile exchange rate. As a people, we must continue to be inspired by the momentum that propelled us to secure support in near record time to implement the PCPEC. We have a history of accomplishments in these situations. In 2017, we renegotiated a derailed IMF program, imposed stringent conditions on ourselves, and collectively achieved them ahead of schedule. From a macro fiscal standpoint, the results were remarkable. Between period 2017 and 2019, economic growth doubled of an average of 7% annually, inflation coming down to single digits 7.9% in 2019 from 15.4 in 2016. The fiscal deficit, which was about 6.5%, was brought under 5%. Exchange rate depreciation reduced significantly to under 5% in 2017, averaging 8.7% between 2017 and 2019. Alongside these achievements, we made significant investment in education, health, infrastructure, and revitalized the financial sector to promote private sector entrepreneurship. We emerged as a bright star on the regional and global stage prior to the pandemic. And no less, in the COVID period, also illustrated a strong desire to keep our people alive. Ladies and gentlemen, we are being called upon to do this again and surpass this stellar performance. We must push past these dark clouds that suddenly gathered and reclaim our manifest destiny. We must resolve and resort to our collective inner strength and overcome this new challenge for our country. We must do this inspired by assurance that the good book provides in Joel 2:25, that I will restore to you the years that the swarming locust has eaten. We shall surely be restored if we persist on this path to recovery and transformation. The Lord has rescued us with the IMF approval. We will recover all. He will restore what the locusts have destroyed, and Ghana shall experience his revival. We'll surely rejoice in the restoration of our nation if we persist on this path of recovery and transformation. The battle is indeed the Lord's. I want to thank you again for your attention. God bless our homeland, Ghana, and make us great and strong. God bless us all. Happy Father's Day.
Lisa, thank you for the presentation. Colleagues, we'll go straight into the questions. We'll try and do at least about 4 rounds of questions. I encourage you to keep them straight to the point, and just to allow your other colleagues to also ask questions, perhaps not more than 2. If we have more room, we will come for some more questions. Just to recap, Minister has spoken about some structural reforms and has made the point that we need all hands on deck. We need everybody's support for these structural reforms to be successful, be they in the cocoa area or moving from cash to commitment basis or SOE reforms. We need everybody on board for it to work. He's also mentioned that one of the vulnerabilities that the IMF talks about, the energy sector vulnerabilities. There's a program, I think he mentioned June, which will outline how those vulnerabilities are going to be dealt with. And then very quickly, remember all of this, and if you listen, he kept using the expression, the IMF-backed PCPEC, because all of this IMF conversation was based on getting support for the PCPEC. And so the whole agenda is about the PCPEC and the growth program in the PCPEC. And that's why he gives examples of Korea, South Africa, America, and even the cross-sector collaboration taking place in Ghana here, among the ministries that he mentioned, to ensure that that growth happens. So, Minister, thank you for the update. We'll take questions now. Let's take a first round of about 4, not more than 2, and then we'll try and do about 4 rounds. So I have 1, 2. So let's start here. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Is there a fourth? Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's start with these 4. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is John Awuni. Minister, when you were speaking, you mentioned that you were in South Korea, and I wanted to find out what is the most critical thing that government needs to do to be or to transform our trajectory, like you mentioned in the South Korea experience. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
No, I thought I called on Edward.
Yes.
So let's follow. Edward.
Thank you. My name is Edward Nyakum, GBC. Sir, on the domestic enhanced program, what are some of the strategies put in place to scale up food production in the country? And also you mentioned the data center that Americans intend to set up. When are we going to see these? Thank you.
Thank you. There were 2 more, yes.
Thank you very much, Honorable. Honorable Operator, you mentioned something like you intend to reach an agreement with bilateral creditors in the next week. My question is, what sort of debt relief agreement did we get from the bilateral creditors? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Maxwell. With the you talked on the remainder of the domestic debt exchange. When do you expect to conclude it?
Thank you very much. Just to recap, and then we'll come for 3 more rounds. Hopefully about 4 questions here. So John was asking, what is the most critical item needed for transformation if we are trying to learn from the examples of South Korea and other places? A second question, what is the plan for real sector agric growth in accordance with the Enhanced Domestic Program, or the PCPEG? It's the same thing. The Enhanced Domestic Program is the same as the PCPEG. And follow-up question on, do we have any timelines for the data center that the Americans are looking to come invest in Ghana on? Third questioner is asking, what's in the pipeline on the bilateral debt relief side? Is there anything in the pipeline that you can share at this stage with the people of Ghana? And then the final question is, when will the remainder of the domestic debt exchange be concluded?
Thank you very much indeed for the question. I think South Korea was quite instructive, and I think that the sacrifices that they did. I remember in one of the presentations, the gentleman said he was going to give us some lottery numbers, and he said 61, 82, 22, 33,400. Like, what's he talking about? And he said, well, in 1961, their GDP per capita was $82 per capita, and in 2022, it is 33,400. And he simply said it's an issue of discipline and commitment and sacrifices. So the issue of agriculture, expressways to open up the country, and then a big push in technology, while the areas of education, etc., were not compromised. Actually, they in fact did not start a national health insurance scheme for a long time because they felt they couldn't afford it, which was interesting. But more importantly, the challenge that they were then throwing at us is that what level of sacrifices are we prepared to do, because they were comfortable that we could do it in much less time than they were able to do it. They also talked about an exchange program, which they did. They called it the CURB financiers. Most of the financing in Korea at that time was done informally. and they actually came up with a program where they reduced the 35% interest rates on bills to almost 18% or so. So they had seen this before and were encouraging us to be strong in our way forward. They also talked about a period in which they actually made an appeal to the country because they were having to go to the IMF, in which 3.5 million citizens brought their gold and jewelry to the government to the tune of $2.2 billion so that the country could then work out. And then they paid the $2.2 billion without interest at a much later stage. So all of that, agriculture, technology are going to be key, and we got an opportunity to speak with a lot of private sector companies. But I think one thing that also ran true was that they worked with their private sector companies to be able to ensure that this transformation was sustainable. On the issue of the fund and data center. Okay, the data center actually, what has occurred was we were already in discussions with the company that is owned or run by Strive Masiyiwa, and therefore part of the trade fair site had been agreed as to how we're going to set up. So really the resources that DFC is going to provide is going to help accelerate the construction of that. Then there was a question on the bilaterals. As all of us know, these things are very, very sensitive as to what one can say, except that, of course, we have successfully gotten the financing assurances from them, which is what we took to the fund. We are now getting to the process of determining the MOU and the actual terms that will emanate from that. But truly, the type of goodwill and forthrightness that we have engaged them through this period, I'm confident that we will come up with an MOU that is acceptable to the program. Domestic debt remainder, we are looking at the legal documentation for the cocoa bills and also the domestic debt, the US dollar denominated one. So my suspicion really is that the SEC needs to clear the documentation, and then we'll formally launch it maybe within the next couple of weeks or so. Then there was a question, that was a domestic, is that right? Referral, bilateralness, yeah, I think that's it.
There's a hand that came up here, so I'll take that one. And then there are, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Shinwa, yeah? I'll come to you in the third round. So let me take 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's go.
Okay, Honorable, thank you. My name is Mark. I work with UTV. Honorable, I know you've been a point of vilification since this whole process. Vilification, people have vilified you, kind of insulted you so much. How does this affect you? Or how does it, and you've gone to court for one of these reasons, how does this affect your recovery efforts from your side? I want to understand. And you also give us a bit of lecture on journalism and circumspection and the rest. What do you expect of the Ghanaian media? What are the specific things you also do for us to help give the right information to the people? Thank you. Second.
Yeah, there's a hand up here. Was that a call? Yes. A call, go.
Thank you very much. Honorable, beyond the bilaterals, do you have what are your timelines for negotiation with the Eurobond holders? You made a line that suggests that you would love to complete these things as soon as possible. So what timelines do you have with that? And is it also one of the benchmarks ahead of your September review you just mentioned? That's the IMF review. On Cocoa Board, we know they have not been doing all core. They've done cocoa roads among other things, and also also part of the debt is because we subsidize the farmers, whereby in cases where even international prices were to drop massively, government will still keep the producer price where it is. So if you're talking about cocoa reforms, can we get a few specifics as to what you mean by that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Musa Lansa with GH1 TV. The SOEs, Musa Lansa, the SOEs keep coming up when it comes to issues of debt. Anytime they're signing their performance contracts, the issue of performance comes up, how they make profits and all that. What is really wrong with the state-owned enterprises in terms of making profits and then helping government deal with debt issues? And secondly, you mentioned social intervention programs and how you intend strengthening them. There's been so much talk on one of the biggest social intervention policies, that's the free SHS. What is the way forward for the free SHS? What are we looking at in terms of review and making it better? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Francis Sinto. I'm with the Ghana News Agency. In your last press briefing, when the agreement was reached with the IMF, you indicated that the government is not in a rush to go to the capital market. But the 3 billion with the IMF is a loan. This evening, you've made us know that there will be additional 2 billion multilateral support. This is equally a loan that we are going in for, further increasing our loan stance. Is it not troubling to you, and is it not also troubling that we are going to be increasing the debt burden on Ghanaians? My other question is on the economic performance. The IMF have indicated that they are seeing signs of stability. This stability on the ground is really not reflecting not only in the pockets of Ghanaians, but businesses who continue to suffer accessing financing on the bank because it's difficult to access it. The government has virtually taken everything. The GNA conducted a market survey just about a week ago, looking at February and June. The prices of tomatoes, pepper, onion are all increasing. Yet you are saying macroeconomic performances are good. When should Ghanaians expect this macroeconomic performance appreciating in their pockets?
Thank you. So just a quick recap. Mark is asking Minister, how do the attacks on you as a person, how do the attacks and insults on you as a person, how do they affect the kind of work that you are doing currently in leading this recovery effort? And then as a sub to that, he's asking what can be done to help reduce the misreportage that pops up in the media. ECHO is asking whether or not there are timelines for the Eurobond holders negotiations, and then whether or not there are any specifics on the cocoa sector reforms. You've mentioned that the committees are now being put in place, but he's asking, do you have any specifics even before the committees start working? Musa takes from your press statement where you mentioned that about 25% of our assessed debt burden emanates from non-central government operations. And I think that's a real big deal that needs to be interrogated. Colleagues in the media, about 25% of our assessed debt burden emanates from non-central government operations. Musa picks from that and is asking what is for you the single largest challenge that these SOEs are facing that is contributing to their contribution to the debt burden. And he's also asking, government has announced in your letter to the fund, in the letter that yourself and the governor of the central bank signed and sent to the fund, government announced that it intends to review flagship programs. He's asking whether or not ahead of that review there are any specifics that you can mention. Musa, am I getting your question correct? Yes. So we suggest to take that. In the letter signed by yourself and the governor to the bank, to the fund, government announced that it intends to review flagship programs. Musa is asking, ahead of that review, are there any specifics that you can mention? And then Francis has a question. Francis, a quick correction. Minister did not say that there will be an additional 2 billion in addition to the fund. What he said is that inclusive, he says altogether and including the IMF funds, World Bank and AFDB support, we expect multilateral support of about 2 billion for the year 2023. So just as a matter of fact, just to correct that, then we don't create a wrong impression there. But your question is still substantive, that do we have any worries about growing debt? That's your substantive question. So though I'm correcting the fact, it's important to still get a substantive question. And then the fund says that they are beginning to see signs of stability. He's asking, when can ordinary businesses and ordinary people at home sense that stability in their pocket? Maybe so. It's our hands.
Great. Thank you very much. That was a GNA man, is that right? Was it Francis, is that right? Great. Thank you very much. I mean, maybe since it's the last question, we can take it right off the bat. So yeah, we were fortunate to be able to get a staff level agreement early in the program to create some sense of stability for all of us to then be able to move on. And then all that we have done during this period to be able to secure the approval. The question that we have in our debt sustainability analysis, incorporates these facilities, which are really very concessional facilities, to move us through to the target of 55% debt to equity ratio by 2028. Because you are not going to be borrowing on a commercial basis. Actually, it's quite minimal, up to about $61 million or something net in that year. And given that your requirements on a basic basis, that's not much. The revenues that we are expecting from GRA, there's a gap that has to be filled. But how do you fill that gap with appropriate, capital, and then reduce that as you go forward, so that by the time these 40-year loans come into being serviced, you have a much stronger base for that. So we have to manage that process, and this guidance as to non-arrears accumulation, etc., all lead to give you the space to be able to do that. On the issue of the economy, I mean, Francis is always relative. I mean, you saw the crisis that we experienced between June and February, and so when you begin to see a trending down, it will take time. But our target is, I think, 29% inflation by year end or so. So we have to move in that direction. It's not an issue of cynicism, it's an issue of reality. This is where we are, this is where we intend to go, and now we have a program that can be measured, that is transparent, and for all of us to be able to do that. I mean, we have to remember that in 2017, the banks basically had nothing to their name. we brought that back into historic profitability. So yes, we've gone through the DDEP program. I think the last numbers I saw for first quarter performance of the banks was actually quite strong, surprisingly, for all of them. And liquidity was not a problem. Now, as to, it's also a fact that we have brought the treasury bill rate from 35% to 20-point-something%. So you can see real work happening. Now, as to when the banks immediately translate it to credit, you know, that's another issue. There's always a sticking point. But you cannot pretend that that has not happened. And that is a signal for the future. Right now, we are just trying to move trends in a way in which you can have hope because you can see the trends going in the right direction. So that will then emanate. You talked about tomatoes and coal, and true. Actually, vegetables, if you look at the CPI, have an interesting high price for that. And Ghana consumes more tomatoes than maybe even Nigeria, and depending on how, because of how we cook. But the true sense of that is Chief Director is helping lead what we call these economic enclaves to be able to address the specific issues of rice, poultry, tomatoes, etc. And that is part of the reason for the trip to Korea in terms of agriculture, etc. And we went to some entrepreneurs to do that. So the question really for all of us is a belief that we can do it, and therefore what is the process of gradually getting there over people who have done it before. Okay, and I think that's the new kind of ecclesia or mindset that we should have as to the direction, and I think it's assailable. Okay, thank you very much for that. Then Musa talked about SOEs. SOEs is a very vexing issue. It's very difficult because if you look at the analysis, anytime we have a joint venture, Ghana versus Nestle or whatever, you can see profitability, same Ghanaians managing. So the question becomes, what kind of attitude is it that these intelligent CEOs somehow cannot, you know, focus on making money and profits for the country? And that the governance issues needs to be assessed. Right now that we've moved from central government financing, which was really just the Ministry of Finance and my MMDAs, to general financing, accounting, I need to look at those things with a lot more rigor because it comes right into our books. So I think that type of stronger oversight, working with SIGA, Director General, who is pretty dynamic, and Minister Kujo, I think we're going to put, you know, deliberate pressure on this to reverse this historical performance that we know can be changed. So that's important. And the issue of protecting the public purse, you know, then moves into a different citizenship responsibility. It's not that you and I or your cousin who works there does not know. So what is it that enables us to allow this kind of behavior to continue without any reprisal? And those are things that we, our own moral internal compass and love of country, should begin to demand more accountability, you know, and that's really where we are at. On the issue of the letter that you talked about in terms of the flagship programs, what we intend to have, you know, a thorough review on to determine how best to finance that. I just, I'm very uncomfortable, when there's a denial that there's true poverty and some people need to be supported. I'm also very uncomfortable when there's a sense that we can grow this country without a solid educational structure or giving people the opportunity to do that. Because when I personally look at myself as having gone to school in Chebi, etc., and being plugged out to then get better education at Achimota School because one's father decided to recognize one. I know the capacity, and I wasn't the best student in Chebi Experimental School. So it just, I know we should make it efficient, we should reform it, but any general sense of dismissiveness and whatever, it's not something that we should countenance as a people, and to give people opportunity to realize who they are. So yes, but we can't waste money in there, and those reforms, hopefully once the studies are done, we'll be able to take action on them. So that's that. The Musa, or is it Moses? Yeah, we answered that. Yeah, we'll manage that. There are clear, as you say, guardrails or bookends to these things. So we'll have to do that. I think really, the questions are all very legitimate, but I really hope that there's a spirit of us as a country going to work together towards a resolution, because it leaves nobody in any good situation if it is not helpful commentary to move us to do better. Then Moses talked about the Eurobond shareholders, and yes, we have given them literally all of the information that is required on the debt sustainability analysis, etc. They've seen what we have done on the domestic front, so that as a good point of our own burden sharing, and I'm sure there's going to be some very hard discussions and negotiations going forward, but I'm confident that we will find a place to land that will be good for everyone, because everybody acknowledges that Ghana as an entity, the future is good, and in our discussions even in China, they were very clear that these were short-term turbulences, and therefore Ghana ought to be supported to that. I think it's that same framework of thought that is going through all of these people that we have obligations to, and we'll seek to do that. We expect, of course, to finalize these negotiations before the first review, which will be in September. So that would really, in my mind, be kind of the target that we put for ourselves. Cocoa Board is a difficult issue. So I think there's going to be joint supervision of the board between us and Ministry of Agriculture, phasing out of cocoa roads in a sense. In terms of re-examining the pricing, so that when the international price, basically tanks, we are still able to support it in a way that is sustainable. But the strategy paper is being done for cabinet by end of June. Then Mark from UTV, Is that right? Mark was talking about vilifications and and the attacks and the difficulties of last year and how it affects the work. It's Mark. I'm human. It's difficult, but you have an assignment, and there are 30.8 million people. At the end, you have to be prayerful and strong about what it is, where you get your energy from to do that. And you also do remember that even people like Dankwa died, so if somebody is pinching you and boxing you, at least you're alive. You can't run away from the responsibilities. And it was a very difficult period. I think everybody at Ministry of Finance would confirm that when we had to focus on making sure that we got a SLA, or as things would have been, that was also the most intense period of those actions. But we had to keep our eye, on the ball, because if we had been derailed, it would have been quite cataclysmic. So yes, I'll just tell you to continue. There were quite a number of intercessors helping us, and we felt the Lord was in the boat. So we'll continue to work and follow His instructions. With regards to the media, I guess my really sense is that we are all Ghanaians and we just need to be fair to each other. And anything that could destabilize. So, for example, I think I was in Korea when the issue of China, and I'm like, ooh, we've been to China, you have Zambia, Chad, Ethiopia, unable to get through over 2 years. This country has been able to say, I have belief in you and I'll support you. We're able to get to the fund, they are agreeing to co-chair, and then you fabricate, something that is not true, that can bring the country down. So then I ask, what is the objective? Truly, what is the objective? It's not about Ken, it's not about Minister of Finance, it's not about President Akufo-Addo. How do you do something that could really enrage, such a powerful partner? And that's worrisome. Then you talked about, let's say, I think Captain Smart's accusation that anyone can get a portion of an IMF loan. And I'm just sort of beside myself as to even how the media itself will not take a position on that. Because I'm the one that has sworn the oath, who the president sends me to talk to negotiate. So if you try to tear down integrity and raise issues, it reduces our negotiating power. So I think it's just an issue of care and maybe a bit of kindness, and heart, that, we are all Ghanaians. If it's not true, don't do it. How to collaborate then becomes maybe more interaction, so that people realize that they are human beings at the end of the statement, and maybe that will soften us to move on. And that's why I went to PAV and Sons issue, where, he is a professional power-nun, and said that for countries such as ours, and the survivability of the state must be very clear to everyone as the one country that we have. So thank you very much for this.
Minister, we're going to wrap up with the final round. There were some hands that were up already. Xinhua was up, the other one was up, and then we'll do these two last ones and then we'll wrap up. So let's start with the Chinese guys. Xinhua.
Yes, thank you very much. So the name is Justice. Yes, if I critical, I would have loved to ask just a simple question, but something you touched upon irked me a bit. And fortunately, the mix of technocrats that you have at the ministry have been quite consistent over a period. So even what I'm going to say, if there is maybe some difficulty in it, they can, correct me. When the GIF was set up, Ghana Infrastructure Fund, I thought that the country was on the path of setting up a sovereign wealth fund, which could be used when our SOEs have their books properly cleaned up. And I actually saw, efforts, for instance, at VRA, efforts to clean up their books so that they could either go to the market on their own strength or actually leverage, the sovereign wealth fund that the nation was going to create to access funding from the market. And so that, because this thing is looking like a cyclical kind of deja vu, it keeps coming up anytime we're in debt crisis, a portion of that debt is attributed to the SOEs, so that we thought that these things were going to be done such that the hands of, or the books of the, central government, could be freed from, the debt situation that the SOEs create. So I thought that the efforts to clean up the books of the SOEs and then to get a kind of sovereign wealth fund which could back them in the market, was going to be done. But I don't know what has happened to that effort. And so, like I was saying, the mix of technocrats we have around here will have a bit of insight into that. And
but specifically, what's the question?
So my question is that, what are we going to do going forward? Because I see a kind of general governance system that the minister is announcing, which is going to bring a lot more burden on the finance ministry in trying to manage, SOEs in addition to managing the state.
No, it's not. So, okay, you finish.
Okay,
because
so
that's not what he's talking about. But
okay, right. So what are we going to do going forward in the long term to ensure that our SOEs become more profitable and they are not, creating extra burdens for the country, for instance, using pension funds, etc., to support them, and then they are able to, make good their indebtedness to the pension fund managers. So that is what I'm trying to ask.
Okay.
And then secondly, also, like you said, yes, we all need to make sacrifices to get, our economy back on track. But the average Ghanaian will ask, what is central government also ready to sacrifice in terms of when it comes to, running of government machinery and the expenditure that comes with it? What is government also ready to sacrifice in terms of that, which will inspire the country itself to follow suit? Thank you.
Very well. So let's continue.
Okay, my name is Emmanuel Bruce from Graphic. The government is still very active on the treasury bill market, which is noted for its short-term nature and then high interest. I want to find out, does this now defeat the purpose of the debt restructuring efforts, which seeks to rather extend our maturities and then reduce the interest? And also, I want to find out when is the government expecting the funds from the World Bank to come in?
Very well. Two more? Yes, these two.
Kingsley, Ghanaian Times. I want to find out whether there's going to be a second round of domestic debt exchange, because Fitch Solutions last week reported that there's going to be a second round because what we have done is not enough. Then secondly, on the Financial Stability Fund, I want to find out whether our bilateral partners have started the commitment they made. Any money has come so far for us to establish the fund.
Thank you. Straightforward questions. So Kingsley is asking you to comment on a speculation by Fitch that there will be another round of domestic debt exchange. He says Fitch is speculating. He would like a comment on it. He also wants to know whether the Financial Stability Fund has received any contributions so far. Am I getting you correct? Emmanuel is asking whether the activity of government on the T-bill market is not defeating the domestic debt program's objectives, and he's asking if we have timelines for when the World Bank and other development partner funding will come in. Justice from Shinwa was asking, the second question I got clearly, what has the central government sacrificed so far, and what more can central government do? As we're asking for burden sharing. So what's the sacrifice so far and what more can be done? And then he's also asking for what sort of terminal program exists to ensure that the SOAs don't become a recurring burden to the fiscals. You have the final word, Honorable Minister.
My name is Winston, Metro TV. First of all, I'd like to commend the Finance Minister for fighting in both fronts, domestically and internationally. It hasn't been easy. We've all been following the update. My question has to do with the Finance Minister made mention that the funds will be hugely monitored to ensure there's transparency of monitoring and accountability. We've gotten a lot of accountability from the internal auditor's report, and there's been little work being done to recover some lost monies. What difference would this make this time around, considering the amount of confidence that everyone is putting into this program? Finally, I would like to know how much has been designated in climate financing by the Finance Ministry in the year 2023.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Winston. Climate financing 2023, are there any numbers to report? And secondly, while we invest hope in transparency and auditing of the funds, what do we say about those who are of the view that the previous ones that have been audited have not led to much? Mr. Hans.
Thank you very much. Winston, when you start off, congratulations. I know it's going to be very easy questions coming. But thank you very much for that recognition. I think, we have to acknowledge that we are here also partly because we have been less than vigilant. And now there's nothing that sharpens your focus more than money at the end of the path. So not only do we know that what we are doing is good for us, but you now have targets in which there will be release of resources that are required. And I'm praying that beyond that, we should be able to ensure that these audits and responses will be done well. I actually don't have the numbers for climate financing, but you know that I think there's a summit in Paris this coming week in which the president is chair of the Climate Vulnerability Forum, and the Minister of Finance for the V20, in which we are looking at these country prosperity plans to find ways to bring more resources in. So the ministry itself is considering an enhanced climate financing division, because that's the way things are going. So we'll watch this space. I think we'll be doing a lot more there. Domestic debt exchange. I think if the question it's about cocoa bills, that's for sure. We're going to do that. About the domestic debt, the US dollar denominated domestic debt, we are going to do that. So that's for certain will happen. With regards to the Financial Stability Fund, the expectation really on our side is that we'll be successful with the World Bank by September for the $250 million, in which we would also have our counterpart financing to support that. But in the program, it's almost up to 2.6% of the GDP as a buffer in the event that things are more difficult than they are, but I'm sure we can contain that. So that's what it is with the domestic debt and the fund. So yes, the World Bank issue is by September. The Treasury bill market, it's a good question. Is it defeating the purpose? Not when you have moved from 35% to 20. Do you get me? So you are gradually finding a way in which you are reducing the rates. It can't just kind of drop like that. But that's a huge change of 15.5 percentage points. And as our revenue base gets stronger, we should be able to reject, prices that do not fit the bill. But it will take a while to gradually bring it to where we can support it in the long term. But your objective is, as you increase your revenues and manage your expenditure, then you really are targeting going down, around inflation or below that. And that's where we are, and it's 8 plus or minus 2% in the medium term. That's what we'll be targeting. Then the issue about sacrifices by central government. I guess it becomes really hackneyed when you talk about reducing government officials or executives' salaries, etc., stepping down the vehicles that are being used. The truth of the matter is that really between salaries and remuneration for the government system and the interest rates that we were paying was consuming all of the revenues that we had. So these actions about looking at productivity, so that at least if you pay, you are getting a return back, and then cutting down the interest expenditures to give that fiscal space are key enablers, for us to move forward. And then the reviews that we are going to do is at the heart of the questions that are being asked, and we expect that when those reports are in, we will do that. SOEs, you raised a good point, deja vu, when can we get this thing, and it's actually quite instructive, because in Korea, at a certain point, they told the SOEs that there's no money, they better go to the stock exchange. And that just changed the whole type of boards that they have, CEOs' accountability to individuals in the country, and not just, to the government. And so we need to drive at that. So with this renewed energy under the framework of this program, I think really is what we should be driving at. Because GIF, you are right, and Development Bank, you are right, become, anchors for proper financing to get it out of government. But the reason why we talked about general government financing is that now it affects my books directly, and to be able to get my 55% by the time of the program, I need to make sure that they are not borrowing. So there will be added focus on that, but not because we want to manage. And therefore strengthening of SIGA and the minister responsible for that. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah. White folks and their problems. No, that's not where my mind is. Yeah.
Honourable Minister, I want to thank you for your time, and your deputies, the Minister of State, your directors, our friends. We're also grateful that you've made time to be with us and to capture the Minister's thoughts. We pray you to share them with our public, in particular, so that everybody will see their role in the task ahead of us. It's not for one person to achieve, it's for all of us to achieve together. So I want to thank you for your time, and we wish you all the best. Thank you for being with us.
you to read. In Sorbonne, where it's called The Man in the Arena, you know, where we need to dare greatly for our country and to spend ourselves in a way because, and it's going to be difficult, but it is, I believe, the way to go. So let's all really rally to rebuild, you know, our walls. We are also very clear about the mutual prosperity dialogue to bring private sector at the center of it and ensure that you know, we all are keepers of the public purse. But I am confident that we are on a path that is strong. There's just strong support internationally, and we ourselves need to step up the game. But I'm sure we can do it with God's help. Thank you.